John's words sliced through the air. People like him don't belong here. Marcus froze, heart pounding. The humiliation hit, but something inside him snapped. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The next moment changed everything. But let's start from the beginning. In a high-end restaurant nestled in downtown Chicago, the atmosphere exuded exclusivity. The chandeliers above cast a soft, golden glow across tables set with perfection, while the black and white marble floors reflected every movement with crisp clarity. The restaurant, a symbol of sophistication, felt as if it were designed to make everyone feel like they were part of something rare. John Peterson, the manager, moved through the room with a sense of command, a man who had clawed his way from the bottom to the top. His crisp suit and controlled demeanor made it clear he was proud of the empire he had built, and he wasn't about to let anyone disrupt it. On this particular evening, a man entered. Marcus Williams. Tall and confident, Marcus had the aura of someone who commanded attention without asking for it. His tailored black suit accentuated his sharp features and his composed walk. His deep brown skin and neatly cropped hair marked him as someone who belonged in any room he chose. Marcus wasn't just anyone. He was one of the city's most successful financial advisors, someone whose advice shaped millions. And tonight, he was here for a simple reason: to enjoy an elegant dinner with Sarah, a friend he hadn't seen in years. But from the moment he stepped inside, John's eyes locked onto him. Something about Marcus didn't sit right with him. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, too assured for someone who didn't seem to fit the look John had come to expect from his clientele. Or maybe it was the subtle contrast between Marcus's understated style and the designer labels worn by many of the other patrons. Whatever it was, John's instinct kicked in. This man wasn't meant to be here. Without a second thought, John approached him. I'm sorry, sir. We require reservations in advance. I'm afraid we don't have a table for you tonight. Marcus blinked, taken aback but composed. I have a reservation, he said calmly, checking his phone. John didn't even glance at the screen. His words came out sharp, colder than the marble floors beneath them. That's not enough, I'm afraid. We don't serve people like you here. The words hung in the air, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. The room fell silent. Marcus's heart raced, the weight of the moment threatening to overwhelm him. He had done nothing to deserve this, yet here he was, facing unjustified humiliation. But he wasn't about to let it define him. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted from calm to tense, the once pleasant hum of conversation now replaced by a heavy silence. Every eye in the room was on the unfolding confrontation. Sarah, sitting at the table, had witnessed everything. Her shock quickly morphed into disbelief and then into rage. She stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor as she made her way toward the scene. Are you seriously doing this? Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and disbelief, echoing throughout the room. It was impossible to ignore the force of her words. John, unfazed by her approach, turned toward her with a stern expression. Ma'am, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you. But Sarah wasn't about to back down. She stood her ground, her face flushed with indignation. I don't care if you're the manager, she snapped, her voice rising now, drawing more attention. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who he is? What's going on here? The other diners looked between each other, unsure whether to get involved. The staff, too, exchanged uneasy glances, visibly uncomfortable but unsure of how to react. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus remained motionless, his jaw clenched, the raw fury inside him simmering. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was personal. He had worked his entire life to get to this point. The late nights, the sacrifices, the sleepless hours, all for the chance to enjoy a simple, peaceful meal. But now, standing in this restaurant, he felt like an outsider in a world he had earned the right to be a part of. The injustice of it hit him hard, and the sting of it was almost unbearable. John sneered, a cold, condescending smile curling at the corners of his lips. "I don't care who he is. People like him don't belong in a restaurant like this." The words were venomous, dripping with contempt. Marcus could feel his fists tighten, the rage inside him turning to an almost physical pain. He had never been so humiliated, never been reduced to the status of a second-class citizen, simply because of who he was. The injustice burned through him, sharp and relentless. Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath, the fury inside him now channeled into something sharper, more controlled. His voice, when it came, was icy, every word cutting through the tension in the room. "John," he said, stepping forward with quiet authority, "you have no idea who you're dealing with." Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her gaze locked on Marcus. This was someone she'd never seen before, so composed, so resolute. The fire she'd witnessed in him earlier had transformed into something more formidable. It wasn't just about a meal, or the injustice of the moment. It was about standing up for something bigger. A surge of respect flooded through her. She could see now that Marcus wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. "I suggest you get the police because I'm not leaving, not until you apologize to me, and to every person in this restaurant who's witnessed this disgraceful behavior." His voice rang out, every syllable laced with certainty, with the kind of strength that only comes from knowing you're right. John's face drained of color, the cocky smirk he'd been wearing vanishing as he registered the weight of Marcus's words. His earlier bravado was slipping, and with it, the power he had once held over the situation. The air was thick with tension, and the guests around them grew uneasy. Whispers began to ripple through the room, but the silence was louder than any conversation. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. His voice grew stronger, more commanding. "You don't get to decide who belongs here. No one gets to decide that for me, or anyone else." The anger in his words was palpable, but it was more than just anger now. It was the voice of someone who had been pushed too far, someone who was no longer willing to tolerate the degradation. Sarah could feel the change in him, the transformation from frustration to empowerment. The intensity in Marcus was undeniable now. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every person who had ever been made to feel small, invisible. The fire in him had become a weapon, and in that moment, he wasn't just fighting for an apology. He was fighting for dignity. After a long moment of silence, John turned and walked to the back. He returned quickly with a clipboard, looking defeated. You're right," he muttered, his voice shaky. "I apologize, Mr. Williams. This won't happen again." The moment of justice was bittersweet. Marcus didn't feel triumphant. He felt vindicated. This wasn't about a meal, but about dignity, about being treated as an equal, no matter who you were. Sarah stood beside him, her eyes wide. "That was amazing," she whispered. Marcus gave a small, weary smile. It wasn't about being amazing. It was about standing up for what's right. As they sat down, the tension in the room dissipated, but the impact of what had just happened lingered. Marcus had been disrespected, but he had also reclaimed his right to dignity. John had learned a painful lesson about judgment, and the restaurant, as well as its patrons, would never forget the night when justice was served. The shock, the hatred, and the anger had led to the final satisfaction. The truth had prevailed.